So let's just get this out there. I'm a failed sound artist. Actually, I'm a failed sound artist and I'm a failed producer. I'm going to tell you a story about creative collaboration, one that spans 2 collaborative partnerships, 2 personal relationships. And these 2 stories, at least in my own mind, have interwoven into one meta failure. So to me, failure is really about grief. Many years ago, I was living with and deeply in love with another artist. The connection we had, at least from my perspective, it was very intense. We lived in Japan together for a bit, and then we started working on collaborations, and that was probably me pushing my collaborative desires onto him. A couple of years into our relationship, and we'd pulled off 2 significant funding opportunities, a major grant and a commission. And that's not bad for 2 20-somethings. And I failed to actually manage to get myself onto palm cards rather than notes, so, you know, it's all happening. The organisation that we had the commission for was a Melbourne-based organisation called Experimenta, and they wanted to get us to produce an interactive audiovisual installation, and that was the thing that we were doing together, about the sense of isolation in large cities, a work which we called Alone Apart. Should have thought about that. Things were a bit weird one evening, and he came home and dumped my ass with a 20-minute leaving speech. I still remember some of those sentences. He also told me that he was seeing someone that we both knew. So while I was packing up to move out that very evening, he went off to his work Christmas party, taking her along. You kind of can't fault him on his efficiency. So despite this deeply traumatising situation, I was so wedded to our creative project that I refused to give it up. Against everyone else's better judgment, because, you know, I clearly had no idea what I was thinking. I refused to let it go because I didn't want him to get the credit for the creative concepts. Yeah. In order for he and I to work together, we had to meet with the organisation for them to arrange a mediator. So one hot, late summer's afternoon, we all met at a cafe while the poor woman from Experimenta had to mediate a meeting between us in order to organise a mediator. With this mediator, we spent several months meeting once a fortnight to try and develop the project. Again, in a public space, because, you know, I know everything about de-escalating difficult situations. But the process damaged me beyond belief. Needless to say, the work was not excellent. In fact, because he wasn't speaking to me, he'd only speak to me via the mediator. He was sitting right next to me. The result was that Alone Apart was never exhibited, not by Experimenta and not by anyone else. They still chose to pay us, though really God knows why. But it was an utter failure. I never made audiovisual installations with anyone else ever again. Somehow the end of that creative partnership and my personal relationship threw me into a place where I found my voice, and I found my creative voice. I even performed at a sound art piece on April Fool's Day, which incidentally would have been our 4-year anniversary, at a sound art event that he was running with his new girlfriend. They were visual artists. Me, being the smart ass, did a performance which ended with, well, fuck you and fuck your art. He wasn't speaking to me, and I needed to say some things, and so if he wasn't going to listen, I was going to do it in front of an audience like this. He didn't hate me before, he really did then. So for a while, he, his new girlfriend, and I all lived in the same city, and it was truly awful. So I threw myself into the world, and I went off to Berlin, which other people have an affinity with, or less of an affinity with, I think. It was something that he and I had been planning to do together, and we'd been taking German language classes in the evening. Instead, I did it alone. Berlin was both a personal and a creative re-emergence for me. And I found my home. I really did. It was the place that I truly belonged. And I made new friends there. These friends are like the family you choose. 2 weeks, of course it's always just before you leave, 2 weeks before I had to leave Berlin because my visa was running out, I met my second creative, personal soulmate. It was a different connection, and as I found out years later, it was even more connected and intense. But that's another story. Hindsight's a bitch. I was even happier to connect with this new person because he wasn't an artist. He was a technician, thank God, a sound engineer. So I was very relieved. We met to work together working on a sound art festival. There's a continuous theme here about sound art, obviously. He was the technical director, I was his tech assistant, and it was the burgeoning of a creative and personal partnership. To me, this was my second chance. As I'd lost so much in my first big breakup, it was a huge deal. No, it was a fucking massive deal for me to introduce the new guy to my friends, and particularly to my creative networks. So I told him it was a risk. But despite that, I took the leap and offered him connections, networks, and opportunities here in Australia. I no longer had a visa to be in Berlin, he didn't have a visa to be in Sydney, so we straddled 2 countries, going backwards and forwards for years, working together when we were geographically co-located and even when we were apart. Sometimes I was his tech assistant, and sometimes I ran the show and he worked to me. He didn't really like the latter. The day after Valentine's Day, he knew I hated Hallmark occasions. He asked me to marry him and started referring to me as his fiancée. Something that I'd never experienced before and haven't since. I sunk everything, my soul, my heart, all my evenings, all my fucking finances. So I'm not bitter by this. I sunk it all into being together, working towards an intent to marry visa, which is now called a prospective partner visa. And should you need to know, I'm just going to give you a little lesson in bureaucracy here. This visa only lasts for 9 months, so we started calling it the knocked up visa. In fact, this was actually a recommendation by the Australian staff at the Australian Embassy in Berlin should we want to expedite the process. Incidentally, I'd busted an ankle around this time after running a major festival, and some of these other people know what it's like to run festivals. And my friends had told me I needed a break, but I don't think that's the kind of one they meant. So with the major injury, I wasn't really in a place to relocate back to Berlin until I'd sorted all the ankle shit out. Hence, I asked him to move here for a little bit. I turned down invitations to play gigs so I could spend time with him and I could do the visa paperwork when he was here in Oz. And since I was staying here for a bit, I'd even sacrificed a paid career that I really wanted, working as a part-time producer at the ABC. In order to pull off his visa, I needed a full-time job and, to do that whole eligible sponsors thing. So I thought, well, I'll take the first job that I get offered. And that happened to be in the city I'd left. That city where all those memories of the big bad ex were? Yeah. The job was also in a different field, working for the Australian government. If you're going to try and pull off a visa, you might as well work for the government, right? But I didn't really want to go back there. So I told my fiancé, that going back there, that was my joker card. My post-Armageddon, Somaya is really desperate for paid work to pay her rent, or in this case, pay for a visa. It was the one last card that I had left up my sleeve, at least I thought so. Actually, it probably was. But I loved him so damn much, I threw that card down on the table hard. I thought I was tough. I thought that even though I didn't want to go back to that city, I'd had difficult times overseas, I hadn't had income, I'd been alone. What could happen? I had nothing to prepare me for what came next. Due to a workplace bullying situation in a new job, I wasn't coping. And in turn, he couldn't cope with the depressive spiral that I was rapidly sliding into. I was alone in a city, being bullied by someone at work, didn't like where I was living, and it was pretty terrible all round. I awoke one morning to an email that read, "Don't ever call me." To this day, we've never spoken in person or on the phone. Unlike the end of my first creative and personal partnership, when my ass was dumped by email, I didn't find my creative voice, and I still haven't. Not only have I not built any creative working partnerships, I've not been able to be creative at all. It's like a massive 4-year-long constipation. The sacrifices I'd made for our relationship were immense, and as I found out, not ones that were reversible. So not only did I lose him, I lost our creative working partnership, which, even though I shouldn't feel like this, I really miss it. And no one has ever invited me to perform as a musician or an artist or exhibit ever again. You're not hearing me play. I also lost my home, my Berlin, because, no more visa. I lost friends, he might have grabbed for some of those. And I lost professional networks in the arts, and that's what really surprised me. And I also lost that career I'd really wanted as a producer back here in Australia. To this day, I've never been able to land another producer or production manager role, and I'm not terrible at it. I've always said, it's not the end of a relationship that causes the damage. It's how someone ends it, and then everything they do afterwards. I was lucky enough to have found my second chance in Berlin, but it seems that some losses are just too great to bear. The creative wind seems to have been completely knocked out of me this time.